Welcome to the Have Good Ripple Effect podcast. Let's jump right in. Welcome back to the Have Good Ripple Effect podcast. I'm Lisa Even, your host, and on today's episode, we are talking all about imposter syndrome. Now, I'm almost certain everyone in their lives has had an experience where they felt not quite enough, right? Like, oh, gosh, I'm a little bit of an imposter. And recently, I had an experience dropping off my daughter at summer camp, which I'll share here in just a minute. And it was one of those mini moments where you just realize that, gosh, even your van, my black minivan, sometimes acts like an imposter too. And I want to share with you on today's episode a hack that I use whenever I'm feeling a little bit of imposter syndrome sneak up. And it's been really helpful for me, not only in my personal life, but in my business life, or even I often say like adult friendship is really hard. And so even when I'm attempting to make new friends, this hack comes in handy. So I'll share the story and then I'll share the strategy. And hopefully you walk away feeling like you can now tackle imposter syndrome when it comes your way. Now, the story goes this summer, I was dropping off my daughter at a summer camp. And this particular summer camp, they're usually about a week long. And it's at what in our town, it's called Living History Farms. And you can probably guess by the name what it is, but it's a camp where they actually have kids come to Living History Farms, which is open throughout the summer too. Like, you know, people from the community can visit as well. But for a week, kids can come and they learn all about what it was like back in, I don't know if it's the 17 or probably 18, early 1900s, where they have a general store and they have different buildings that emulate what it was like to live back then. And so the kids get to spend the whole entire week learning about how they used to make butter and, they get to visit the general store and do all of these really unique things. They even do a creek walk where they get to walk through the creek and look for minnows and, look at different plants that would have been really helpful to folks back in the day. So on this particular day, I'm dropping my daughter off. Of course, I'm in a hurry and you turn off a highway to then go on a gravel road for, I don't know, probably 3/4 of a mile. And on this gravel road, there are a ton of potholes. So it looks like it needs to have new gravel laid down, but they haven't done it yet. So I'm driving my black minivan down this road. It had rained earlier that morning. And as I'm driving, I'm trying to like dodge the puddles and these big potholes. And I am going fairly slow because I don't want to get my van completely dirty. She's black. And so any sort of, dust or dirt, it shows. There's this car coming towards us. And on gravel roads, usually scoot over to the side so you can give that other car room to pass. Well, this car that clearly, they've dropped their kid off, they're headed out, is not going slow. And they end up splashing my van to the point where I'll have to put the picture in the show notes because the van is completely covered in muddy water. And it looks like we have gone off-roading in my minivan for like 3 days. It was pretty surprising when it happened, number one. And then I got out. So I went to drop my daughter off. We both were like, whoa, that was crazy. And then I had planned to stop at the mall to do a return on my way home because the Living History Farms from our house is closer to the mall than we live. And so I get to the mall and I get out to survey the amount of muddy water on my van. And I look at it and I'm like, oh my goodness, my van is so dirty. And I had parked without even realizing it 2 spots away from a Jeep Rubicon. And I look for my van and I look at the Jeep and I think, Vanny, that's her name. Vanny, you are an imposter, my friend. You are trying to act like the Jeep. And for whatever reason, in that moment, it made me laugh because I thought, even my van has imposter syndrome sometimes. Now, I did wash the van almost immediately because it was disgusting, but it made me really sit down and pause and think, when I'm handling imposter syndrome, what do I do? And this is the hack that I've been using for probably the last 4 years, maybe even longer. But certainly when I started a business, you get your business started and you think, okay, now I'm the business, right? Like I've got this business. And so it's easy to let syndrome creep in. And so here's the hack I want to share with you today. The hack is this. First off, whenever I feel imposter syndrome, like you're not good enough or they're going to know, she doesn't necessarily have it all together, right? Behind the scenes, you're just literally like scraping by. The imposter syndrome hack that I use is twofold. The first thing I do is I think of a grounding thought, meaning something to calm myself down. It's almost like I'm in my head saying, Lisa, chill out. But oftentimes I will think to myself, Lisa, the world needs the real you. And that's my grounding thought. I tend to have a lot of energy. I'm creative and I am not afraid to try new things. And so, the imposter in me says, well, I should dial it in. I should not be as energetic. Or, maybe I shared a wild and wacky idea. Ah, they're not going to like it. Like all of those thoughts are creep in. And I say to myself, time out. What's the thought, right, that I need to be having? And so mine oftentimes is the world needs the real you. I'm not for everyone. Like one of my biggest fears is not being liked, right? I really want people to like me. And so I get a little bit of imposter syndrome. And so I have that grounding thought first. So whatever it is, what's the grounding thought? And then the second thing that I follow it up with, and this is really the hack, is the get through phrase. Like if anybody ever says something to me, what is the phrase that I can say back to them that just helps me get through? And so I was recently at a wedding and I was going to be seeing a lot of people I hadn't seen in a while, some of which I've known for years and years, and then some of which not very long. And I was like, okay, if anybody says anything about me doing, keynote speaking and starting a podcast and writing a book, I'm going to have the get through phrase of, and I'm having fun doing it. I'm having fun doing it. And sure enough, I went to the wedding and I had a couple of people, they're longtime friends from childhood, right? And they kind of use this like, almost like, oh, you're out there doing all this stuff, right? I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it just makes me feel a little bit of an imposter. Like, okay, small town Lisa, like I shouldn't be out here doing this. And they said it and I followed it up with, yeah, I'm having fun doing it. And I walked away. Now that interaction was so tiny. I have no idea if they were meaning like, who do you think you are? Too big for your britches. I have no idea. They could have even been like, you're out there doing cool things. But in my mind, I immediately went to panic mode of imposter syndrome. And that get through phrase helped me get through, right? Yeah, having fun doing it. I had a get through phrase for my book, and it's still actually like in my pocket, tucked inside. That if anyone says anything about my book not being a very good book, which people will think that, right? There are people out in the world, and I'm holding the book up right now. The get through phrase, and actually on one of the first copies that I received in the mail of the book, I wrote this on the inside is if anybody said to me, oh, your book's not very good, I was going to say to them, this is my get through phrase, I'm doing hard things. What are you doing? I'm doing hard things. What are you doing? And I know, and I actually wrote right below there, good tone, because it really does matter if you have a get through phrase and you're kind of a jerk about it. It's not probably the most useful thing. So it was kind of like, what are the words that I can have pre planned, say them out loud, but also in a good tone? I was like, yeah, gosh, I'm doing hard things, like kind of proud of that. Yeah. What are you doing? What are you up to these days? To really help me pivot in that interaction and let the imposter syndrome go down, like push it down and kind of say to myself, not today. So, my challenge to you, whether it's you masquerading a minivan trying to be a Jeep, right? Where we think a little like, oh, they're going to call me on it. They're going to know I'm a minivan. I'm not a Jeep. Right? When you do the next thing where you're trying something new, or maybe you're changing careers, or even just getting yourself brave enough to think or act in a different way. Number one, what is your grounding thought? What's the thing that you can think to yourself of like, okay, time out, pause for a second. The world needs you. The world needs this. And then secondly, what is your get through phrase? What's the thing that's going to get you through if anybody comes up to you and says, well, hmm, right? If you feel in any way that someone's calling you out, what is that get through phrase in a good tone that you can say to them? Now, I know this is not easy. It's certainly not easy for me, but I tell you, pre planning that little tiny, like one sentence thing, it changes interactions and it also allows you to have a tiny bit of confidence in those situations. So, what's your get through phrase and what's your grounding thought? The next time you have imposter syndrome, I want you to try this out and then report back, right? Tell me how it went. And that first few times you do it, it's going to feel a little weird, right? But what success are you seeing? Now, that was today's life hack, or I don't know, business hack in both ways. And hopefully share this with a friend. Maybe you know someone who's dreaming about something and they just haven't moved forward. Share this because, yeah, you happen to the world, not the other way around. Thanks again for joining, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Have Good Ripple Effect podcast. To book me for your next event or get more content like this, visit lisaeven.com. Thanks for listening. Visit lisaeven.com to learn about events and grab a copy of my book, Joy is My Job.